The argument is not made. You've beautifully articulated the big challenge in terms of representative democracy, and I think it is a question worth pondering and at some length as to how we've come so far away from the idea that we elect people and we want to hold them accountable. I don't know where the slip between cup and lip came. But once we've gone on this trend of everything requires voter approval. Everything, you and I as voters have to be involved in every decision government makes. I don't know about you. I mean, I spend my life looking at this stuff. But I don't have the access to the resources to really understand the give and take. I don't want to be making these decisions. I think that's why I elect people. There is such distrust in politicians and elected officials and the fact that they are influenced by special interests that even elected officials, even elected,
nobody trusts them because they are not representing the people.
That's right.
That's the bottom line.
And you know, I think they actually do represent the people pretty darn well. I do. People talk about special interests, and they talk about special interests are driving Colorado's budget.
Well, they are, because special interests are getting all these amendments passed.
But special interests, we spend 42% of this budget on kids, on schools. I said in a presentation for the Colorado Medical Society when somebody was pushing back on special interests a while ago, we're talking about letting very special interests have a say in the damn budget. I think the most special interest we have in that right now are kids. Absolutely, there's an important and powerful education lobby. And they're lobbying on behalf of our kids, and that doesn't bother me. I think they should be.
I think we're going to be able to take one or two more questions because we could keep you all day.
Is Ritter going to support Bill 228?
Don't know?
There's no indication one way or the other?
No.
I think it's fair to say they understand the issue and that, like generally the idea, there is a question about timing and also the legal questions around it that they are, in my mind, being way too cautious about.
I would suggest to you that I've spent a lot of time with the lawyers in the governor's office. They agree with the legal question. They have no questions about our legal interpretation of this. The lawyers have told me that on multiple occasions. I think that they have not indicated, and I will stand by my answer, they have indicated not at all whether they're in favor or opposed to doing this. I agree with what Wade says. They understand the complexities of it, but there are other issues at work in terms of timing and how that relates to what they're trying to do on transportation. And quite frankly, if you've read, I would commend that all of you, after hearing me talk, go read an op-ed piece in the Denver Post today. Written by a gentleman named Walker Stapleton, who, by the way, has announced, or if he hasn't announced, it's widely rumored is going to be a candidate for state treasurer, who talks about the same thing I'm talking about. And he talks about it as a limit on spending and the fact that if you get rid of it, you're going to grow government. It's simply not true. It's simply not true. I don't know what to say. It's simply not, it just isn't true. But that's the argument that the people who want to keep this provision in place, the people who really want to shrink the size of government, are going to make. And they're going to make it over and over again, whether it's true or not, just like they said when referendum C was going to increase everybody's taxes, or it was going to take away your tax refund. It simply isn't true. But in the world of political gamesmanship, you say things, we all do it, that aren't completely true. And I think that the ability, how that gets manipulated in the public eye is also of concern. When the governor has a lot of other priorities as well that he's concerned about, and I think that's what's going on in their office. But they have not said that they are opposed to it, and they have not said that if it gets to his desk that he would sign it. So
let's take one more question from him.
Well, you basically answered it, I think, and that is, what can you articulate the arguments against this bill. I mean, that's one of them, certainly, but it's true enough. What else are they going to say?
There are really three big arguments, and then little pieces of each of them. One is that the legislature can't legally do it because it's a spending limit according to TABOR, and it can't be changed without voter approval. That is one argument that is being made, and we feel pretty confident that there is an alternative legal opinion. And bottom line, that we know there's an alternative legal opinion. We feel relatively confident that the court would side with the alternative that says it's not a limit. But the thing we know for sure is the only way we're ultimately going to resolve that question is let the court have the case. And the only way they're going to get the case is if we pass the statute. So that's one argument. The second argument is this spending limit argument. It's an argument that has been historically called a spending limit, even though if you look at the statute, it says a restriction on general fund appropriations. It's never called a spending limit anywhere in the provision, but historically it's been called that. And so it's being used as an argument to say this is all about people trying to grow government, make it bigger, take over, assume a larger part of the overall economy, influence the market, et cetera, et cetera. That is sort of the biggest, there's a big group of people who make that argument. And again, I hope I showed you here that it doesn't increase the size of government, doesn't increase anybody's taxes, it just changes the way we spend it. So that's a big argument. And let me say the best argument they have there on that is that, remember the chart where I talked about, or the slide where I talked about what was cut last time around? And I said no general fund for capital or transportation. The one thing that this structure allows is that if that's sort of our savings account, I think you called it, we sort of put it in our savings account, we spend it on transportation, so that in a year when the economy goes down, that's what you cut. The first cuts come to transportation and capital construction. And the argument I've heard is, had you not had this thing in place, the cuts would have come sooner to K-12 or higher ed or Medicaid. Well, maybe, if we didn't use a portion of that money to save, that may well be. But that's another argument they make, that this would mean we would spend all these dollars and the cuts would come more frequently, and that would be really bad. I'd love to have a long time to talk about the response to that, but I know I'm down to 1 minute. So that's sort of the second argument. The third argument is it cuts transportation. And that our transportation system is in terrible shape, and they're absolutely right. Our transportation system is in terrible shape. But the question is, what are the priorities for the $200 million? Would you rather build roads, or whether you invested in food stamps and Medicaid and K-12 and higher education? And that is the hard job that we elected officials to do. That's the slice, that's the piece, that's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the opportunity to be on the rubber chicken circuit. And it's why each of us needs to dig down into our own souls and see if we're willing to put the commitment on the table to be an elected official, because the work that they do is thankless and hard. But by golly, we have a system in place right now that if we don't like what our elected officials do, if they don't represent our interests, we have a very simple way to deal with that, and we vote them out. And it's a system that's been in place for a long time, and it's quite frankly has worked pretty effectively over the last couple hundred years. And in Colorado, as we've moved more and more away from representative democracy to a system of direct democracy, you see less and less accountability for our elected officials. And I think that is the biggest and most really difficult thing that comes with this direct democracy that doesn't get discussed very often, and that is how far we're moving away from actually being able to hold the people that we elected accountable. Because you now go to them and say, why did you spend this money on transportation rather than on kids? And they say, because we didn't have any choice. We ought to give them the choice and give ourselves the accountability to make sure that they're doing what we want them to. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.